Good morning, everybody.
Godmorgen alle sammen.
Happy Sabbath.
Glædelig sabbat.
Welcome back to California.
Velkommen tilbage til
Let's
Californien.
open with prayer.
Lad os begynde med en bøn.
Almighty God in heaven,
Almægtige,
thank you for these messages, and we
takker-
thank you for the messengers.
vi
We
takker dig
just
for,
pray that you'll be with us today to help us to learn and remember and understand these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
I want to welcome everybody back.
Jeg vil gerne byde alle velkommen tilbage.
The second of our third presentation this weekend.
Den anden er i alt 3 præsentationer den her weekend.
So just want to do a brief review of what we discussed yesterday.
Jeg vil gerne hurtigt gennemgå det, som vi diskuterede i går.
So before I do that, I'd like to ask maybe a few of you what you remember of yesterday, and either how it made you feel. I guess more of a testimony as opposed to the facts and figures.
Men før jeg gør det, så vil jeg gerne lige høre, hvad I husker fra gårsdagens præsentation. Og måske mere et spørgsmål om, hvordan det fik jer til at føle, end nøgternt fakta.
Who had the Christine? Yeah.
We were discussing. I'm sorry. I can tell you how I didn't feel. I started feeling like I was thinking, is it me? Is it me that's sitting here and I don't belong here? I started questioning myself.
So I posted the title of yesterday's presentation, and it was based upon a comment that I made during the study.
Så jeg lagde titlen på præsentationen op i går, og det var baseret på en kommentar, jeg kom med under præsentationen.
And it's something along the lines, the enemy within the gate.
Og titlen var Fjenden inden døre.
And it sounds quite accusatory.
Og det lyder meget, som om jeg anklager nogen.
And Christine was saying that it made her,
Anklagende.
or it forced her to examine herself to see if she was that person.
Og Christy her sagde, at det fik hende til at føle, at hun, eller det fik hende til at rense sig selv, da hun følte, at hun
Sorry,
måske...
did you want to say anything else, Christine? No? Okay. Anyone else?
Nogle andre?
Nobody?
Ingen?
I'll ask somebody if somebody wants to volunteer.
Jeg spørger bare,
Kathy.
Eller så frivilligt. Kathy.
Basically the same. I can't know.
It's fine.
Oh. What had me really reflecting again, like Christine said, mainly I was like praying, Lord, please don't let it be me, I don't want to be.
1 second. So Kathy said that she had similar thoughts to Christine.
Så Kathy sagde, at hun havde lignende tanker, som Christine havde det.
And she was praying that, speaking to the Lord, communicating with the Lord, to say that she didn't want that person to be her, or she didn't want to be that person.
Og hun kommunikerede med Herren, med talt til Gud, om at hun ønsker, at hun ikke er den person.
Okay. Victoria.
Victoria.
So Victoria had similar thoughts to both Christine and Kathy.
Så Victoria havde lignende tanker som både Christine og Kathy.
Got it.
My thoughts are wrong and I don't know how to convince it. I wrote how it made me feel because I was meditating a lot upon it, but I don't know how to convince it for you.
So Victoria says that she had similar thoughts,
Så Victoria siger, hun havde lignende tanker,
but she doesn't quite know how to put those thoughts, those feelings succinctly in words.
men hun ved ikke helt, hvordan hun skal formulere sig kortfattet omkring de tanker, som
And to be honest, I think I feel the same way.
for at være ærlig, så vil jeg mene, jeg har det på samme måde.
That it really made me wonder, am I in the faith? Am I kidding myself?
Det fik mig til at tænke på, om er jeg i troen? Prøver jeg at narre mig selv?
And someone messaged me,
Og nogen, de skrev en besked til mig.
and in their message, they focused on the point about Noah's children, Noah's sons.
Og i den besked, der er stillet et spørgsmål til mig i forhold til Noahs
Because that story obviously focuses upon the sins of the men.
fordi den historie fokuserer på mændenes synder.
And we spoke about that idea yesterday,
Og vi talte om den idé i går,
about at a very simple level that sinners enter into the new world.
på et meget simpelt plan, at syndere, de kommer til den nye jord,
The new earth.
den nye jord.
And I don't know what individuals think that means,
Og jeg ved ikke, hvad individer tænker, at det betyder.
if they think that open sinners are going to be able to enter into heaven or not.
Om de tror, at åbne syndere vil komme til himlen eller ej.
But the point that I wanted to get from that, without giving a definitive answer,
Men pointen, som jeg gerne vil frem til, uden at få et definitivt svar,
was that those men didn't suddenly turn bad after the flood.
det var, at de mænd blev ikke pludselig dårlige efter floden. Efter syndefloden.
They took what we see in the new earth
De tog det, som vi ser i den nye jord,
is a manifestation of the baggage that they were carrying with them in the old earth.
at det er en manifestation af den bagage, som de tog med sig fra den gamle jord.
I'm not trying to suggest that open sinners, practicing sinners, will enter heaven. That wasn't the point I wanted to make.
Pointen var ikke, at åbenlyse syndere, de kom til himlen.
So many of you who have watched older presentations or who have spoken to me over the years and know me well,
Mange af jer, som har set tidligere præsentationer, eller som har talt med mig over i løbet af årene og kender mig godt,
know that I have a particular view of heaven
ved, at jeg har et særligt syn på himlen
and of the old earth.
og på den gamle jord.
But I don't think they're that much different.
Jeg tror ikke, de er så forskellige.
That if we're not happy here, if we can't get on together, we won't be happy in heaven.
Således at hvis ikke vi kan være glade her og komme godt ud af det med hinanden, så vil vi heller ikke være det i himlen.
We can express that idea, that concept in different ways.
Man vil kunne forklare det koncept på forskellige måder.
And maybe a more palatable way to express it
Og en mere fordøjelig måde at forklare det på,
is that we're all on a journey.
det er, at vi alle er på en rejse.
And some people are further along in their walk, in their relationship with God than others.
Nogle er længere i den her vandring, eller deres forhold med Gud, end andre er.
But the flood comes whether you're ready or not, or how far along on your journey you are.
Men syndfloden kommer, om du er klar eller ej, og ligegyldigt hvor langt du er på din rejse.
And it's important for us to understand that we don't reach perfection in the way many Christians conceptualize what perfection looks like.
Og det er vigtigt at fastslå, at vi ikke opnår perfektion, som mange kristne de forestiller sig, at vi opnår perfektion.
This side of heaven.
Den her side af himlen.
And again, I don't want to be misunderstood to suggest that sin enters into heaven.
Jeg vil ikke hentyde til, at synd det kommer ind i himlen.
But the damage that we carry,
Men den skade, som vi går med,
we speak about, it's a phrase that we borrow from Ellen White, the house in which we live.
Jeg vil bruge en frase, som er lånt fra Ellen White, huset, hvor i vi bor.
When I say we carry this damage,
Når jeg siger, at vi bærer rundt på den her skade,
in that phrase I mean the we, I don't mean the house.
i den sætning, så mener jeg vi og ikke huset.
We get new bodies, we all understand that.
Vi får nye kroppe, det forstår vi alle.
But the damage that sin has done to us, the inner person, is a phrase that we often use.
Den skaden, som synden har gjort ved os, den indre person, er en frase, vi ofte bruger.
Doesn't easily get erased.
Den bliver ikke nemt udvisket.
God does not have the ability, the power, the strength to fix that problem.
Gud har ikke evnen, styrken til at fikse det problem.
Yes. God does not have the ability to fix that in the lifetime of human being, 70 years.
Gud har ikke evnen til at fikse det i løbet af et menneskeliv 70 år.
It takes a long time for that damage to heal.
Det tager lang tid for den skade at hele.
And I'm sure we're all aware of it because we're mature within this movement in its concept and ideas.
Og jeg er sikker på, at vi alle er bevidste om det i den her bevægelse.
The purpose of creation is relationships.
At formålet med skabelsen, det var forhold.
Human beings were designed, engineered to be the counterpart of God. We know that.
Mennesker blev skabt, designet til at være Guds modstykke, det ved vi.
So when I spoke about God not having the ability or the power to repair us, to fix us,
Når jeg talte om Gud, der ikke havde evnen til at reparere os, eller ordne os, fikse os,
in one lifetime,
på en livstid.
in addition to that,
Som tilføjelse dertil,
God can't heal us, repair us without our cooperation.
så kan Gud ikke hele os, eller reparere os uden vores samarbejde.
I use the word cooperation, but it's not a very good word to use.
Jeg bruger ordet samarbejde, men det er ikke et særligt godt ord at bruge.
Because it doesn't do justice to the enormity of the problem that confronts us and God.
For det gør ikke problemets størrelse, retfærdighed, som konfronterer os.
We all have a pretty good working definition of what sin is.
Vi har alle en ret god definition af, hvad synd er.
In the King James, it defines sin in this way.
King James versionen af Bibelen definerer synd således.
To the person who knows to do good and doesn't do it,
Til personen, som ved, hvad det vil sige at gøre godt og ikke gøre
it is
det,
sin.
er det synd.
So the idea there is that sin has to be based on an understanding of something, of information.
Der er ideen, at synd beror sig på, at man forstår noget, man har en
If you
forståelse.
don't have cognition, you cannot be held responsible. And if you're not held responsible, you're not doing sin.
Hvis ikke du har erkendelse, så kan du ikke holdes ansvarlig, og hvis ikke du kan holdes ansvarlig, så synder du ikke.
Now that simple statement sounds easy because it's a Bible verse that we could all go to and quote.
Så den definition lyder nem, for det er et bibelcitat, som vi alle kan gå til at citere.
So this is an open-ended question, and you might see it differently to me.
Så det er et åbent spørgsmål. I ser det måske anderledes, end jeg gør.
We're going to define sin in that way.
Vi vil definere synd på den
There's
måde.
a big problem.
Hvis vi gør det, så er der et stort problem.
What do you think that big problem would be?
Hvad tror I, at det store problem vil være?
Anybody got any thoughts about why is it such a big problem if sin is defined based upon a person's knowledge?
Nogen der har en idé om, hvorfor det er et stort problem, hvis synd defineres på baggrund af en persons viden?
Christine?
Yeah.
As an excuse not to try to learn something because they figure like I don't know it and I can't be accused of it.
So Christine says there's this concept of being willingly ignorant.
Så Christine taler om, at der er et koncept om at være
So you deliberately don't
Ja.
investigate things so that you can escape the accusation of the crime.
så at man med vilje holder sig uviden, så man kan undgå at holdes ansvarlig for
Lena?
kriminelle handlinger.
Okay, so Lena said the same thing, that there's this concept of being willingly ignorant, deliberately covering your eyes and your ears so that you can escape investigation.
Så Lena siger det samme koncept om at være bevidst uvidende for at undgå forfølgelse og undersøgelse.
Emmanuel?
I was having the same thought, and I was like, how about the one that didn't know? What do they know?
So Emmanuel had a similar thought. Anyone else?
Så hun har samme tanke. Andre
Well,
tanker.
Willing ignorance is still a choice.
Yes, so the idea is the problem, Bob said that willingly ignorance is still a choice.
Så Bob siger, at den
So we all know that you can't escape using that issue.
at vi ved alle, at vi kan ikke undgå ved at bruge det emne.
Jackie?
He said.
Okay, the same point. So what I want to suggest,
Så det som jeg vil,
after Lena gives her point,
Ritual sinning in society, whatever that group is, because the group doesn't know what is that they're doing sin, and they're trying to intervention from somebody who knows better. This is sin, so the society can virtually or for a long time.
so Lena said, if no one in a community or society knows that sin is occurring,
så Lena siger, at hvis der ikke er nogen i et samfund eller i et community, der ved, at der foregår synd,
the sin perpetuates and it doesn't get sorted out.
så fortsætter synden, og den bliver ikke løst.
So I have a similar thought, which I'll share in a moment.
Så jeg har en lignende tanke, som jeg vil dele med et øjeblik.
So just remember what Lena said.
Så husk bare lige på, hvad
Larry?
Lena sagde.
One could use that as a way to judge others. Some who are more knowledgeable could look at another group and say, "You judgmental, you condescending," because they don't know what they.
So a problem with this idea of sin,
Så problemet med
because
ideen om
people
synd,
have different understandings of a particular issue,
folk har forståelser for forskellige emner, og
we
Problem.
view the problem differently.
derfor ser de også problemet forskelligartet.
And just introducing the idea of loving the sinner and hating the sin
Og ideen om at elske synderen, men hade synden,
and I've hardly ever met anybody that doesn't fall foul of that issue,
og jeg har stort set aldrig mødt nogen, der ikke
that doesn't fall into that trap. They end
Like-
up hating the sinner as much as the sin.
ender med at hade så meget som synden.
It opens the door to judging people.
Det åbner døren for at dømme folk.
So to me, what seems a real problem with this idea
Så for mig er det, der lader til at være det
is
store,
that sin becomes subjective.
det er, at synden bliver subjektiv.
It eradicates the idea of objective sin or absolute sin.
Den fjerner ideen om objektiv, absolut synd.
It does away with the idea of sin being something that's absolute or objective.
Den fjerner ideen om, at synd er noget absolut,
Because you can't apply the rules, the law,
for man kan ikke anvende reglerne, loven,
equally.
ligeligt.
It has to be applied individually.
Den skal anvendes individuelt.
And they're the points, particularly that Lena and Larry brought forth.
Og det er pointerne, som Lena og Larry de er fremkommet med.
And I really want us to think how messy that is.
Jeg vil gerne have, at vi virkelig tænker på, hvor rodet det er.
And in the book of Hebrews, Paul addresses this issue
Og i Hebræerbrevet, der adresserer Paulus det her emne.
after speaking about the superiority and the validity of Christ's ministry.
Efter at have talt om Kristus
Paul speaks about a new covenant.
gerning, så taler Paulus om en ny.
And does anybody know the argument that he makes when he says, the conclusion of the matter is we have such a high priest and there's going to be a new covenant. And then he says something that's really interesting, I think.
Og er der nogen, der forstår argumentet, som han bruger i sine afsluttende bemærkninger, hvor han siger, at konklusionen er dette, og så videre, og så videre.
Gloria.
Gloria.
So Gloria says we have an intercessor,
Så Gloria siger, at vi har
which is true,
en forbeder, som er
but he
korrekt,
says something else.
men der siges noget andet.
Anybody have a thought?
Nogen, der har en tanke.
Samaria.
That he says Christ is here once. We sound like only one sentence.
So Paul speaks about Christ entering once for all the sins, but he makes another point.
Så Paulus taler om, at Kristus går ind en gang for at løse
This
alt.
idea about individualism.
Det er noget andet, Paulus. Den her idé om individualisme.
So Paul says,
Så Paulus siger,
and when I give you the paraphrase, you'll tell me the verse.
og når jeg genfortæller, så må I sige verset.
So Paul says that in the new covenant,
Så Paulus siger, i den nye pagt,
everybody who's in a new covenant relationship
at alle, som er i den nye pagt,
doesn't need to be taught by someone else,
ikke behøver at blive lært af en anden. Men
because they can learn about God themselves.
de kan selv lære om Gud.
And I've always wondered about that.
Jeg har altid tænkt på det.
If that were true at the surface, I'd be without a job.
For hvis det var sandt på overfladeniveauet, så havde jeg ikke
Who
haft,
found the chapter and the verse?
hvem fandt kapitlet og verset?
Okay, they're still looking.
Det er folk, de kigger.
Hebrews 8.
Hebræerbrevet kapitel 8.
We've got chapter 8, verse 10.
I har kapitel 8, vers 10.
So let's just double check if that's correct.
8 is where it talks about the
Lad
new
os
covenant.
double check.
So we're just double checking.
Så vi dobbelttjekker bare lige.
So Kathy says 8:11 and it's 8:11.
Så det er 8.
So it says that
Yeah.
they shall not teach every person their neighbor.
Og der står,
Say, know the Lord,
så der står, og de skulle ikke lære hver sin medborger og hver sin
because
bror.
everybody shall know me.
Kend Herren, til de skulle alle kende mig.
For me, when I read this passage,
For mig, når jeg læser den her passage,
it speaks about teaching,
det taler om at
which is really about instructing,
lære, som virkelig handler om at instruere.
and the same people who teach,
De samme folk, som lærer.
because who are the teachers
For
in Israel?
for hvem er underviserne eller lærerne i Israel?
The priesthood.
Det er præsterne.
And who are the judges?
Og hvem er dommerne?
The priesthood.
Præsterne.
So this idea of teaching, instruction cannot be separated from judgment.
Så den her idé om at lære, kan ikke adskilles fra
This idea of an individualized salvation,
kan ikke adskilles fra dommen. Den her idé om individuel frelse,
tailor fitted for every single one of us,
der er skræddersyet til hver enkelt af os,
is problematic.
er problematisk.
And why is it problematic?
Og hvorfor er det problematisk?
Because those pesky iPhones
Fordi de frygtelige iPhones,
enable this.
de har
So
gjort dette.
this whole idea of a subjective salvation
Så hele ideen om subjektiv frelse
for Noah and
Noah.
the children,
og børnene,
where God will deal with each of them individually, not corporately,
at Gud vil dømme dem alle individuelt, og ikke
which
som,
agrees with Hebrews 8:11,
som er i overensstemmelse med Hebræerbrevet kapitel 8, vers 11,
is against everything that we spoke about yesterday and over the last few presentations.
går imod alt det, som vi talte i går og de sidste par præsentationer.
You have a challenge in front of you,
I har en udfordring foran jer,
not to judge one another,
om ikke at dømme hinanden,
to understand that salvation is an individual experience
at forstå, at frelse er en individuel,
that will all enter heaven at, we'll say at a different level or a different experience,
at vi alle vil nå til himlen på forskellige niveauer, eller ved at have forskellige erfaringer.
and yet we all have to do it together because we can't do it on our own.
Men samtidig skal vi også gøre det sammen, for vi kan ikke gøre det alene.
So all of these competing theological issues
Og alle de her konkurrerende teologiske problematikker eller emner
are all a living reality for us here in this room.
er alt sammen en levende realitet for os i det her rum.
And just outside in the other room,
Lige udenfor i et andet lokale,
where they're also eating,
hvor de også spiser,
they have no idea about the reality of the great controversy and what it means and how it's affecting us.
der har de ingen idé om den store strid, og om hvordan det påvirker os.
Did anybody want to say something or comment?
Er der nogen, der vil sige noget eller kommentere?
Penny, did you want to say something?
Penny, vil du
Nej.
sige noget?
Jackie?
Jackie?
I'm thinking now because what an example in this contrast between over there and here. What is our responsibility?
So for people online, we're at a hotel conference room.
Så for folk online, så er vi i et konferencelokale på et hotel.
It's early morning here, and the people in the other room are having their breakfast. They're just the regular guests.
Det er tidlig morgen her, og de andre regelmæssige gæster, de spiser morgenmad ved siden af.
And Jackie spoke about the contrast and the responsibility that we have.
Og Jackie talte om det ansvar, som vi har,
And I would like
kontrasten mellem det ansvar, som vi har.
And we ate with them this morning.
And what's interesting is
Og det interessante, det er
not only the responsibility
ikke blot ansvaret
and the privilege,
og privilegiet,
but just before the meeting, Jackie and others in this group were actually sitting with those same people and eating with them.
det var, at Jackie sagde, at hørte I lige det sidste,
And they had no idea of who we are or what we're about.
at de har ingen idé om, hvad vi laver, eller hvad vi taler om.
Emmanuel?
Manuel,
Talk about the iPhone is there. With the profession. Are you trying to say that we are getting same information the same way? Like, there's no one who's having more understanding of the information. We all receive it in our phone. You do too, so we're like, and try to figure out on our own, and interpret it in our own way.
So Emmanuel was asking about the iPhone because I keep on going on about that.
så Manuel, han spurgte ind til iPhone, fordi jeg blev ved med at tale om det.
He was asking about what point I'm trying to make and what truth we should get from that.
Han spurgte ind til, hvilken pointe jeg prøver at nå frem til, og hvilken sandhed vi skulle få ud af det.
Of course, it's not about the phone itself. We all know that it's not the hardware, even the software.
Det handler selvfølgelig ikke om telefonen i sig selv, hverken softwaren eller hardwaren.
It's about the dream of the person who created this piece of equipment.
Men det omhandler drømmen, som personen, der opfandt det her værktøj, havde. Hvilken drøm?
Because they were seeking for the truth.
For de søgte efter sandheden.
We might say seeking for God.
Vi vil måske omtale det som søgte.
And the system, the corporate structure, let that person down. It failed them.
Og systemet fejlede personen. Skuffede ham.
And whatever hurt or pain it caused that person,
Og den smerte, som det forvoldte personen,
they thought they could make a difference to others in a similar situation, to people in the world.
de troede, at de kunne gøre en forskel for andre personer i verden i en lignende situation.
People like us who had been let down by society.
Folk som os, som er blevet skuffet af samfundet,
By the church, by the state,
af kirken, af
by
staten,
those who have power.
af dem, som har magt.
And this person's dream was to set us free.
Den her persons drøm, det var at sætte os fri.
So even though I speak about it in a negative way,
Så selvom jeg taler om det på en negativ måde,
I want us to understand that the purpose of that was positive.
så vil jeg gerne have, at vi forstår, at formålet, det var positivt.
But it has unintended consequences.
Men det har uintentionelle konsekvenser.
Okay, so that was part of the summary of yesterday, the story of Noah and this journey that each of those people are on.
Okay, så det var en del af det, vi talte om i går. Historien om Noah og den vandring, som de hver især er på.
And when we get to heaven, many of us are going there
Og når vi,
in a broken and damaged state.
så vil mange af os nå dertil i en ødelagt stadie.
And the only way things get fixed
En ødelagt tilstand. Og den eneste måde, som tingene bliver ordnet på,
is if we cooperate with God in the plan of salvation.
er, hvis vi samarbejder med Gud i frelseplanen.
1 second, we've got an audio problem. Is it okay now? I used the word cooperation. I said it wasn't a very good word.
Vi brugte ordet samarbejde. Jeg sagde, det ikke var et godt ord.
We spoke about the definition of sin,
Vi talte om definitionen af synd,
that it's subjective
at det er subjektivt,
and it cannot be fixed
og det kan ikke være fikseret,
unless you know that you're doing sin,
medmindre man ved, at man synder.
which is a point that someone brought up. I think it was Lena brought that up.
Hvilket er en pointe, som jeg tror, Lena bragte op.
Years ago, there were several studies that were done on the subject of understanding and wisdom.
Flere år siden, så var der et studie, der blev lavet omkring visdom og forståelse.
And who is wisdom?
Og hvem er visdom?
Penny? Sophia.
Sophia.
Good. So some people remember those studies.
Så nogle folk, de husker de studier.
And if the person is us, is me,
Og hvis personen er os, det er mig,
we know that Sophia is someone else,
så ved vi, at Sophia er en anden,
an external agent.
en ekstern agent.
So we have to have understanding and wisdom.
Så vi er nødt til at have forståelse og visdom.
And I think I framed it in this very simplistic way.
Og jeg tror, at jeg formulerede det på en meget
That wisdom is the correct application or usage of information or knowledge.
Visdom er den korrekte anvendelse og forståelse af viden.
So it's not enough just to know what sin is, then you need to have wisdom in how to behave properly.
Så det er ikke nok bare at vide, hvad synd er, men du skal også dernæst have den viden til at vide, hvordan du skal.
So
Yeah.
the reason I like the story of Noah, there are many stories that we can glean from that, many lessons, and I've spoken about it many times in the past.
Grunden til, at jeg godt kan lide historien om Noah, og der er mange andre historier, som jeg har talt om flere gange i fortiden.
Last time, when we spoke about Noah,
Sidste gang, da vi talte om Noah,
that caused a bit of a storm.
så forvoldte det lidt af en storm,
Because I spoke about how horrible God was.
for jeg talte om, hvor frygtelig Gud var.
Building such a small boat.
Han byggede så lille en båd.
Even if you wanted salvation, you couldn't get it.
Selv hvis du ønskede frelse, så kunne du ikke få det.
Because there's just not enough space for everybody.
For der er bare ikke nok plads for alle.
What I found interesting about that conversation
Det, som jeg fandt interessant ved den samtale,
was how ready and how quickly, I'm going to say everybody, but that's sort of generic.
det var, hvor hurtigt alle, jeg ved, at jeg siger alle sådan meget generisk,
How quick people were to defend God.
hvor hurtigt folk var til at forsvare Gud.
God knew no one wanted to go on the ark, so God just made it the right size.
Gud vidste, at jeg ikke ville med på båden, så han lavede den til en rigtig størrelse.
People here are smiling when I just said that,
Folk her smiler, når jeg lige har sagt det.
but I think people actually believe it.
Men jeg tror, at folk de faktisk tror det.
They believe God made a small boat because God had foresight that no one wanted to get on anyway. So why waste the wood?
De tror, at Gud han allerede vidste, at folk de ikke ville komme med, så han designede en mindre båd. Hvorfor spille træet? Hvorfor spille træet på det?
I'm not so sure, to be honest.
Jeg er ikke så sikker for at være ærlig.
So, sorry, I didn't catch your name. Eva. Eva said, is that predestination?
Eva siger, at det er prædestination.
So I'm going to say the simple answer is yes, I believe it is.
Og jeg vil sige, at det simple svar er ja, det er det.
I don't infer that that's a dirty word when it comes to God.
Jeg vil ikke hentyde til, at det er et dårligt ord, når det kommer til Gud.
But if you're not careful, it can get pretty ugly.
Men hvis ikke man er forsigtig, så kan det hurtigt blive grimt.
And I don't know what Eva thinks about it, but I'm not too inclined to go down the path of predestination because I don't think it's a very good theology or a doctrine to hold on to. It's really problematic.
Jeg ved ikke, hvad Eva tænker om prædestination, men det er ikke en vej, jeg har lyst til at gå ned af, da det er ret problematisk.
For me, I'd rather serve a God that was ignorant rather than one that used predestination to work things out.
For mig så vil jeg hellere tjene en Gud, som er uvidende, frem for en, der brugte prædestination til at, ligesom at løse problemet.
Okay, so I've got a couple of hands up. The only reason I mentioned that story
Okay, så nu har jeg et par hænder op, men den eneste grund til at nævne den historie,
is because today's story about Noah is completely different and I think much more positive.
det er, at jeg mener, at den her dags historie om Noah, den er meget anderledes og meget mere positiv.
Go ahead.
Hearing in the past, in the Adventist church, that was not.
Okay, so Eva, I guess he's like me. She doesn't like the concept or the theology of predestination. Is that right?
Okay, så Eva, hun kan heller ikke lide prædestination.
Because it was taught that God is not predestined for people to get lost.
Yeah. Because God doesn't predestine people to be lost or saved.
For Gud, han prædestinerer ikke folk til at være tabte eller frelste.
Christine, did you have your hand up?
Christine, har du din hånd op?
So the question then becomes, how does God know the end from the beginning?
Så spørgsmålet bliver så, hvordan kender Gud enden fra begyndelsen?
I'm not going to answer that question,
Jeg vil ikke besvare det spørgsmål,
but I want to pose another one, and I'm not expecting an answer.
men jeg vil gerne stille et andet, og jeg forventer ikke et svar.
How does Satan know the end from the beginning?
Hvordan kender Satan enden fra begyndelsen?
Because Satan's pretty good at it as well.
For Satan er også ret god til det.
So that's just a sort of a throwaway question. I need to respond. Emmanuel?
Emmanuel.
Because Satan knows God.
Because who knows God?
Satan knows God.
Oh, so Emmanuel said because Satan knows God.
Okay,
That's
så
how.
siger, fordi Satan kender Gud.
But if we were to use that argument,
Så hvis vi skal bruge det argument,
then we'd say God knows us. So that's how God knows the end from the beginning.
og Satan kender så også enden fra begyndelsen.
And I think that's a stronger argument than it sounds the way I've just expressed it. It's a much more powerful one argument.
Det er meget mere kraftigt, stærkt argument.
Donna?
I was just commenting about Eva's predestination, and I just wanted to say that it was predestination or free will. That was the choice in the argument between the Calvinists and
So Donna is taking us back to the Armenian and the Calvinist struggle.
Så Donna tager os tilbage til kalvinismens og Armeniens strid, mener jeg, hun sagde.
And there's this theological tension. It's throughout many different cultures, many different religions, but in the Christian religion, it was brought out in that history.
Hørte ikke lige, hvad der blev sagt.
And the tension is between predestination, or things just are going to happen this way, they're predefined,
At prædestinationen indebærer, at tingene, de som bare vil ske på forhånd, de er prædefineret
versus free will or choice.
i forhold til fri vilje eller valget, et valg.
So she was just commenting on the point that Eva had made originally about predestination.
Jeg kommenterede bare på pointen, som Eva, hun havde fremkommet med tidligere omkring
And why Adventists don't agree with predestination.
og hvorfor adventister ikke er enige i prædestination.
Samaria?
when we were talking about how the state program, I remember elders take out because, or they don't, how they have to like study as we do. It was in the context of, I think, the death of the kings of the north, how that's not actually the case, but how we thought they used to be, and Satan did as well. So they don't really know the end. They're not full.
So Samaria is saying that based upon what someone said,
Så mig siger, at baseret på, hvad nogle andre de sagde,
we won't mention their name,
jeg vil ikke sige deres navn,
that Satan doesn't really know the future,
at Satan faktisk ikke rigtig kender fremtiden.
just as Emmanuel said, Satan's just very clever,
Ligesom Emmanuel sagde, Satan er bare rigtig klog,
which is not what God is.
hvilket ikke er, hvad Gud er.
God's not clever, God just knows.
Gud er ikke klog, Gud ved det bare.
That's the point you're making, I think, Samaria, is it? That's the difference,
Jeg tror, det er den forskel, som jeg er kommet med. Det er
because
forskel.
that's what Samaria's recollection of the argument that was used by that person, that teacher. So I don't want to get into a theological debate about this subject,
Så jeg vil ikke ind i en teologisk debat omkring det her spørgsmål,
but I do have to say
men jeg er nødt til at sige,
that the agents that God uses
at de agenter, som Gud han bruger,
aren't very good ones.
ikke er nogen særlig gode nogen.
Because if God was so knowledgeable,
For hvis Gud han var så,
God tends to give us people who make really bad mistakes, damaging ones.
så lader Gud til at bruge folk, som kommer til at lave nogle virkelig slemme fejl.
God is so knowledgeable about the future.
Og hvis Gud han er så,
God has a habit or a reputation of picking bad agents.
så har Gud et dårligt omdømme i forhold til at vælge nogle dårlige agenter,
Who are very prone to sending you in the wrong direction.
som er meget tilbøjelige til at sende dig i en forkert retning.
We spoke about churches number 5 and 7 yesterday.
Vi talte om kirke nummer 5 og 7 i går,
You can blame the membership all you want,
og man kan bebrejde medlemmerne alt det, man vil.
but who are the real criminals?
Men hvem er de rigtige kriminelle?
Who are the ones that misdirected those churches?
Hvem er dem, som snød de her kirker?
We can say prophets and not name them, the unnamed prophets, if we want.
Vi kan godt sige det, de unavngivne profeter, hvis vi vil.
But if you want to be real,
Men hvis
put
man,
some names to them.
Men hvis man virkelig vil være reel, så er du nødt til at,
I think that's either 2018-19. Which one?
jeg tror det var i 2019, kan du huske
Which year?
hvilket år?
I'm asking my translator which year.
I spørger min oversætter, hvilket år?
Oh, you can't remember.
Hun kan ikke huske det.
No. So back in France, there was a school of the prophets in 18 or 19 where we identified who those bad people were. The angel of Sardis is Miller,
Sardis kirkens engel er William
and it's
Mill.
his prejudices, his bad theology that sends Sardis into a zombie, turns it into a zombie church.
Det er hans dårlige teologi, der gør Sardis kirken til en zombiekirke.
And Laodicea is confronted with the same issue.
Laodikea konfronteres med det samme problem.
What's the Bible verse?
Hvad er bibelverset?
Without time, the people perish. Good.
Uden tid, så
That's not a real Bible verse, by the way.
det er ikke et rigtigt bibelvers i øvrigt.
I made that one up.
Det fandt jeg selv på.
But it's true.
Men det er sandt.
She was so fixated about the issue of time.
Hun var så fikseret
She,
på emnet omhandlende tid.
her message, her theology took the church into Laodicea.
Hendes teologi, hendes budskab tog kirken til Laodikea.
I hope we're all mature enough when I say,
Jeg håber, vi alle er modne nok, når jeg siger,
God was so omnipotent, had such power,
at Gud han var så almægtig, havde så stor magt.
wouldn't he choose better prophets?
Hvis han havde det, ville han så ikke have valgt nogle bedre profeter?
Because the reason why this movement is still struggling, but why a movement is needed,
For grunden til, at den her bevægelse, den stadig kæmper, men at den stadig er nødvendig,
it's not just to combat Moses,
det er ikke blot for at bekæmpe Moses.
our biggest problem is Ellen White.
Vores største problem er Ellen White.
Our struggle with end time prophecy is all about analyzing, viewing, and dismantling what she has said.
Vores opgave i endetidsprofetien, det er at skille det, hun har sagt ad.
And to do that properly is a difficult and a dangerous task.
At gøre det ordentligt er en svær og farlig opgave.
Okay, a couple more questions because I've made us digress and I apologize. Phil.
Spørgsmål mere, der har fået os bagveje.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry, I thought you had your hand up. Anyone else? Manuel.
Andre?
Why do people perish without time? Why do people perish when there's no time?
So the question is, why do people perish when there's no time?
Spørgsmålet er, hvorfor forgår folk, hvis ikke der er nogen tid, som jeg sagde?
Because it was wrong.
Fordi det var forkert.
We've demonstrated and proven that time continued to be the key to unlock end time prophecy. We've demonstrated that as a movement.
Vi har vist som bevægelse, at tid, det er nøglen til at låse op for endetidsprofetierne. Det har vi vist som bevægelse.
At least in my mind, that's how I understand things.
I det mindste i mit sind, det er sådan,
They had a prophet. I'll give a random date because I'm not very good at dates.
Så jeg vil give en tilfældig dato, der er ikke særlig god med data.
From 1848 onward,
Fra 1848 frem,
that instructed the church that they should ignore time.
der blev kirken instrueret i, at de ikke skulle kigge på tid mere.
And what should she have really been doing?
Og hvad burde hun i stedet for have gjort?
Obviously focusing on time, but what have they forgotten?
Selvfølgelig kigget på tiden, men hvad havde de glemt?
What have they rejected?
Hvad havde de forkastet?
The 25-20.
25-20
Because come 1863, as
kommer til,
the 25-20 comes to its conclusion, they're just going to destroy that.
når 25-20-profetien kommer til dens ende, så vil de bare ødelægge den.
That's why I say without time, the people perished.
Derfor siger jeg, at uden tid, så forgår folket.
This movement is created upon time, as we know,
Den her bevægelse, den er skabt ovenpå på tid.
because every Adventist knows that we're living at the end of the world.
Og enhver adventist ved, at vi lever i verdens ende.
But that's a stretchy term because nobody actually knows what that means.
Men det er et meget udvidet begreb, for ingen ved, hvad det betyder.
And most of you, if you like, most people in this movement,
Og de fleste af os i den her bevægelse
are asking the question,
de,
what is the Sunday law?
hvad er søndagsloven?
Because you're looking for another marker.
For man leder efter endnu en markør,
Which is time.
som er tid.
Without time, we perish.
Uden tid, der forgår vi.
So that's all I wanted to say about that point.
Så det, jeg vil sige om den punkt.
Okay, so we've done I think a fair summary, at least partially, of what we discussed yesterday.
Hvis vi har kommet med en god opsummering af, hvad vi diskuterede i går.
We spoke about the concept of shaking,
Vi talte om konceptet om en rystelse,
and
en krise.
we tried to have a better understanding of what the components or the structure of a shaking looked like, what it was.
Og vi prøvede at diskutere de forskellige komponenter ved den her rystelse, hvad den består af.
And you remember all these shakings here,
Og jeg husker, at i alle de her kriser eller rystelser her,
yesterday we said the most important one
i går sagde vi, at den allervigtigste,
was this one, 2021 France.
det var den her i 2021 i Frankrig.
Or did we say it was the least important?
Vi sagde, at det var den mindst vigtige.
You can't hear my translator laughing.
Jeg kan ikke høre min oversætter
So
grine.
we spoke about the concept of shaking,
Så vi snakker om konceptet om en rystelse,
and the place I wanted to bring us to
og det sted, som jeg gerne vil bringe os hen til,
which is only a temporary stop,
hvilket kun er et midlertidigt stop,
which we've been discussing or leading to for many months now,
som vi har diskuteret og lidt op til i mange måneder nu,
is to consider the question, are we in a shaking at the moment?
det er at overveje spørgsmålet, er vi i en krise eller rystelse nu? Det vil ryste,
And if without some careful consideration, it's too easy to say we're not.
og uden en grundig granskning, så er det for nemt at sige, at det er vi ikke.
Because it doesn't appear to have, the situation that we're in doesn't appear to have the same dynamic or characteristics as all of these.
For situationen, som jeg er i nu, lader ikke til at have alle de dynamikker, som de andre rystelser eller kriser havde.
Because people aren't leaving, there's no split, there's no separation.
For der er ikke nogen folk, der forlader bevægelsen. Der er ikke nogen splittelse. Eller, ja.
So I'm going to suggest we came to a conclusion or
Så
an agreement
jeg vil mene, at vi kom til enighed.
without defining what the issues are, what the doctrine. We've got a few here, but the point I'm making is not that this is the definition of what's causing the shaking.
uden at komme med en definition af, hvad der forårsager den her rystelse,
I think we agreed that we're in a shaking,
så tror jeg, at vi bliver enige om, at vi er i en rystelse, en krise.
and someone used the idea that it's more individual.
Og nogen kom med ideen om, at det er mere individuelt.
And I introduced the idea of people being here in body, but not in spirit.
Og jeg har introduceret ideen om, at folk de er her kropsligt, men ikke i ånden. Eller i sind.
And if you incorporate that facet to a shaking,
Og hvis vi indbygger det aspekt ind i en
then we
krise,
have all the characteristics of a crisis or a shaking in our present history.
så har vi alle karakteristikerne for en krise eller en rystelse i vores nuværende historie.
That people
Nuværende
are
tid,
separating one from another,
at folk de går fra hinanden,
aided and abetted by the events that have occurred over the last several years or even the last few decades,
at hjulpet og tilskyndet af alle de begivenheder, der har udspillet sig de seneste årtier.
we mentioned two.
Vi nævnte 2.
We mentioned the new gurus,
Vi nævnte de nye guruer,
and we mentioned COVID and the lockdowns that were associated with it.
og vi nævnte corona og de nedlukninger, der var associeret med corona.
So if we're in a shaking
Så hvis vi er i en rystelse, en krise,
and individuals aren't leaving,
og individerne de ikke forlader bevægelsen,
but they're not with us in spirit, in mind,
men de er ikke med os i ånden, i sindet,
without perhaps focusing on these issues, maybe we can't do it without focusing on them, but if we can, let's try.
måske vi ikke kan fokusere på det uden de her problemer, men måske vi kan, lade os prøve.
Why are they, or you,
Hvorfor er de, eller du,
not leaving?
hvorfor går de ikke?
What keeps you here?
Hvad holder dig her?
If you're distracted, if you don't agree, if you're not sure, why are you staying?
Du er distraheret, hvis du er i tvivl. Hvorfor bliver du så? Hvis du er usikker,
Or your neighbor, if that's who you're thinking about.
eller din nabo, hvis det er hende, du tænker på.
So I'd like some thoughts.
Så jeg kunne godt tænke mig nogle tanker.
Do you know anybody that fits into this?
Kender du nogen, som passer ind i det her?
A friend,
En ven,
a child,
et barn,
a sibling,
et familiemedlem eller en søster,
parent,
forældre,
and of course a spouse.
og selvfølgelig din partner.
So you have different people, different relationships that you have with people, but you know them well. Do you know people that fit into that category?
Kender folk, som passer ind i den kategori?
And if you do,
Og hvis du gør,
why do you think they're just not saying, I'm going, you carry on, I'll do something else? Why are they sort of staying, but they're not really participating? They're not really joining us,
tror du, de bliver,
or joining you?
går ikke rigtig nogen steder, men de bliver alligevel. Hvorfor tror du, det sker?
Alison,
Ligesom,
Think about, the individual need not to go. Where do they go? I mean, going back to corporate admin, they know better, I think, I'm assuming.
there's nothing there, and they've come this far in this movement for so long, they've got friends who are comfortable here, just to not agree with those three things up there in the time that we are in. For whatever reason, I don't know, whatever's going on in their lives. But they feel like we're hurting people, they don't want to go to the world, they want to how bad that is, they want to practice bad in the church, they don't want to care for them.
So Alison has said,
Så Alison, hun har sagt,
the reason they're not leaving
grunden til, at de ikke går,
is because they've got nowhere to go.
det er, at de ikke har noget
They've
alternativ.
got no viable, meaningful alternative.
De har ikke noget meningsfuldt alternativ.
And that's a difference today compared to all of these other ones.
Og det er forskellen i dag sammenlignet med alle de andre.
All of the people that left in these histories,
Alle de andre folk, som havde
they
forladt,
felt so strongly about something
de følte så stærkt om noget. Det er så stærkt holdning til noget.
they had an idea
De havde en idé,
that was strong enough to carry them out of the movement.
som til sidst bragte dem ud af bevægelsen.
And this person here today, the one that Alison has described,
Personen her i dag, som Alison har beskrevet,
doesn't have that.
har ikke dette.
They don't have an alternative ideology or theology.
De har ikke teologien eller teknologien
For them to be able to stand up and walk on their own path.
til, at de vil kunne rejse sig og gå deres egen vej.
So they're stuck here.
Så de sidder fast her.
Alyssa,
Lisa,
Fear of death.
so Alyssa says they're afraid or they have a fear of death.
så Lisa siger, at de har en frygt for døden.
So that's a similar idea that Alison said,
Det er en lignende idé til det, som Alison hun sagde.
because I'm going to say broadly, all of these stories,
Så jeg vil sige bredt, at alle de her,
there was a fear of death,
der var der en frygt for døden.
but their fear was if they remain, they will die.
Det var, ja, deres frygt, det var, at hvis de blev, så ville de dø.
So the accusation of death or being a murderer was leveled at us.
Så beskyldningen om at være en morder eller at dø, den blev henvendt til os.
So we're going to say to 2019,
Så kigger vi på 2019,
they
Okay.
split from us, they separate from us,
de gik væk fra os,
because if they remain, they will die.
for hvis de blev, så ville de dø.
But Alyssa said that these people feel that if they leave, they will die.
Men Alisa sagde, at de følte, at hvis de gik, så ville de dø.
If I understood you correctly.
Hvis jeg forstod dig korrekt.
So if that's true,
Så hvis det er sandt,
if you leave, you die.
hvis du forlader, så dør du.
I understand the idea of staying.
Så hvis jeg forstår,
Then
at,
why not the spiritual engagement? Why the disconnect spiritually?
hvorfor er der så den her manglende forbindelse åndeligt?
What's your argument to say they're staying in body because they're afraid of death, but if they stay here, not in spirit, it's a death sentence anyway. They know that.
Hvad er argumentet for, at de bliver? Fordi hvis de er her, og de ikke er her i ånden, så giver det heller ikke nogen mening. Det ved de.
So, no, you carry on.
The thing that comes to mind is that
in their minds, they've struggled with points and not feeling heard, and so they've just stopped engaging. And
So these people that Alyssa's speaking about,
Så de her mennesker, som Alissa hun taler om,
don't actually agree with what we believe,
er faktisk ikke enige med det, som vi tror.
and they don't feel heard.
De føler sig ikke hørt.
Is that what you've just said?
yeah,
Hvad er
but
det,
I'm seeing it
du netop
differently.
sagde?
I'll give you a moment to get your thoughts together.
Vi bliver
Aaron.
på samme tankerne. Aaron,
I think if you're still here after 2021, that means you've signed up to all the logic of gender equality.
So we've got 2021 here, but this is not a timeline in its normal sense.
så vi har 2021 her, men det er ikke en tidslinje i den normale forstand.
So Aaron said, if you've got past 2021, so he's turned that into a waymark,
Så Aaron han forvandler 2021 til et vejmærke og siger, at hvis du er kommet forbi 2021,
then you have agreed, you've bought into, you've accepted, agreed, bought into, accepted,
så er du enig i, har købt dig ind i og accepteret
the logic of this movement,
den her bevægelses logik,
the premise upon which it's constructed.
præmissen, hvorpå den er konstrueret.
And
Og
As the years go by, if you realize it's not very exciting or you don't like it because you're sexist, homophobic, then you're going to have to physically leave because you're going to have to say, I'm sexist, so I'm leaving. And that's shameful. If you compare it to race, a lot of people that are racist, they go, I'm not racist, but I don't, you know, I don't want to whatever, mix with some other race. So they know it's shameful.
so Aaron has given a couple of examples,
så Aaron er kommet med et par eksempler.
race and gender, I think, the ones that you spoke of.
So
Race
gender's not an
og
example, it's the real thing.
køn.
So compare it to race.
So he spoke about, I'm just going to say gender and race,
Så han talte om køn og race.
and he said they don't leave because of peer pressure or social pressure.
Og han siger, at de ikke er gået på grund af social pres.
And peer pressure is being different to those around you, and the embarrassment that's attached to that.
Og gruppepres er at være anderledes fra de andre, og skammen, som er forbundet dermed.
So you can agree with all of the logic that brings you to 2021,
Så du kan være enig med hele logikken, der bringer dig til 2021.
but it says fundamentally you have some disagreement with the truth that this message portrays.
Helt fundamentalt, så har man nogle problematikker, nogle problemer med de sandheder, som den her bevægelse portrætterer.
That you're sexist or you're racist,
At man er sexist eller racist,
but you're embarrassed to make that known because it's not culturally acceptable.
men man er pinligt berørt over, at det bliver kendt, fordi det er ikke kulturelt acceptabelt.
Aaron?
And then the next step is
Aaron?
with this test, it's so easy to lie to yourself that, like I say, I'm not racist, but you can say I'm not sexist, but it's not a very interesting message. It's too easy to kid yourself.
So Aaron has said,
Så Aaron har sagt,
which is a phrase that I, and I'm sure that all of you, hear very often,
hvilket er en sætning, som jeg og I sikkert hører ofte,
and it normally comes from men,
kommer normalt fra mænd,
normally comes from husbands,
kommer normalt fra manden i forholdet,
and their first statement, not literally, is this:
og deres første udsagn ikke bogstaveligt talt, at det er det.
I'm not sexist.
Jeg er ikke sexist.
I know they are over there somewhere, but not me.
Jeg ved, de er derovre et eller andet sted, men ikke mig.
I find it interesting when people say that
Jeg finder det interessant, når folk de siger det,
for two reasons.
for to.
One of it is people feel defensive to make that statement.
Til dels så er folk defensive, når de kommer med det statement.
And the second thing, women, I never hear women say that. I'm not sexist.
Og det andet er, at jeg hører aldrig kvinder sige det, at jeg ikke er sexist.
Because I think many women are in their own way, their own sphere of influence, as sexist, as patriarchal as men are, but they never speak about it that way.
Og jeg tror, at mange kvinder er lige så sexistiske som mænd, patriarkalske, men de taler ikke om det på den måde.
Okay, I hope I portrayed those thoughts accurately. By the way, what was 2021?
Radical feminism.
Jeg håber, jeg har portrætteret de tanker korrekt. I øvrigt, hvad var 2021?
And get married.
So this is the waymark that Aaron wanted to create there,
Så
or
det der,
mark,
som Aaron han gerne ville skabe,
and I asked him what that waymark was, and he said it was radical feminism,
og jeg spurgte ham, hvad det var, mærke det var, og han sagde radikal feminisme,
and
And gay marriage.
og han sagde,
I call it same-sex marriage.
jeg vil kalde det for homoseksuelle ægteskaber.
So once you get to this year, with all the logic that's built up, it's very difficult to argue against it.
Det er meget svært at argumentere mod den logik, som er opbygget.
People have got nowhere to go.
Folk, de har ikke noget sted at gå hen.
They're either, in this context, we'll say that they're sexist,
Den her kontekst vil nu kunne sige, at de er enten er sexistiske,
but they don't want to verbalize it
men de vil ikke verbalisere det,
because of embarrassment or shame.
på grund af, at de føler sig pinligt berørt eller skam.
Any other thoughts?
Nogle andre tanker.
Why don't you just go?
Hvorfor går man ikke bare?
Bob,
I think there's a very dangerous and subtle situation where people they think by power of association to the movement, and yet they can hold on to and appease themselves with having this individual mentality that they're able to have their own connection with God that way, but they're still part of the movement, and it's a kind of self-deception.
okay, so Bob says there's a self-deception going on.
Så Bob siger, at der er en
There's some peace. There's the
That's
peace and
good.
comfort of being associated or being part of this movement,
der er noget positivt ved at være associeret med den her bevægelse,
even though they have these individual ideas which aren't in agreement with the movement's position on certain points.
selvom de har nogle individuelle tanker, som er i uoverensstemmelse med den her bevægelse.
Lily,
Lily,
so Lily has brought up this idea of being dependent upon somebody.
så Lily har bragt emnet op om at være afhængig af nogen.
And several months ago, an article was posted on the movement forums
For flere måneder siden blev en artikel delt på et forum.
speaking about middle-aged women who had been lied and cheated to.
Der talte om middelaldrende kvinder, som er blevet løjet og været utro overfor. som havde været udsat for løgne og utroskab.
The patriarchal system had promised them freedom, but it actually enslaved them.
Det patriarkalske system havde lovet dem frihed, men det gjorde dem til slaver.
And that had happened decades ago in their lives.
Det var sket for årtier siden i deres liv.
They had sacrificed,
De havde ofret,
or as Aaron said, they agreed with the logic,
eller som Aaron siger, de var inde i logikken.
they come to a point in their experience,
De
in their marriage,
kommer til et punkt i deres oplevelse,
and they
experience,
want out
de vil gerne ud,
a divorce,
skilsmisse,
but they can't
men det kan de ikke,
because they're tied and they're locked into their marriages because of financial dependency.
fordi de er fastlåst i deres ægteskab grundet finansiel afhængighed.
So that's a real phenomena.
Så det er et reelt fænomen.
And in that example, Lily has helped us to see both literally and symbolically or spiritually why people remain.
Og i det eksempel har Lille fået os til at se, hvorfor folk de bliver i bevægelsen.
Not so easy to go.
Det er ikke så nemt at gå,
And sometimes you've got nowhere to go to.
og samtidig har man ikke noget sted at gå til.
So, I am trying to think about this, why the person is still here and they don't leave. It is because each one of us has a brain and you need to have certain explanation. So when a question like this comes up, it is probably that they need more information to understand. That's why they are still here. So it's not that they deny, but they still need more.
So Christina has suggested
Så Christina har foreslået
something similar to what Alyssa was saying earlier on.
noget lignende, som Elisa hun sagde tidligere.
It's not that people have rejected the truth or information. It's just they don't understand.
Det handler om, at de ikke forstår,
And they're waiting for some decent person
og de venter på en
to make the effort to
anstændig
explain
person,
things to them in a way that they can understand.
som vil gøre en anstrengelse for at forklare tingene på en måde, så de kan forstå det.
So they understand all the logic that brings us to this place,
Så de forstår hele logikken, som får os til det her sted,
but they still have questions which aren't getting answered.
men de har stadig spørgsmål, som forbliver ubesvaret.
So I know people still wanted to make a response to some of the points we've already done, but I just want to move on a little bit.
Så jeg ved, at folk de gerne vil komme med flere svar til det her, men jeg vil gerne gå lidt videre.
Does anybody here feel either disenfranchised?
Er der nogen her, der enten føler sig
Disenfranchised means that they don't feel part of the group. They're not part of the structure.
at der er nogen der her, der føler, at de har fået frataget deres rettigheder, de ikke er en del af gruppen, strukturen,
And they have opinions or questions
og som har holdninger eller
which are
spørgsmål,
problematic.
som er problematiske.
And do you feel afraid to ask these questions?
Føler du dig bange for at stille de her spørgsmål?
Because we'll all turn around and say, how dare you ask things like that? You're so sexist.
Og vi vil alle vende os om og spørge, hvordan tillader du dig at spørge om de her ting? Det er så sexistisk.
So I don't know if Christina was talking about someone she knows,
Så jeg ved ikke, om Christina hun talte om nogen, hun kender,
But the point she brings up, I come across all the time.
Men den pointe, hun bringer op, den kommer
And
op,
it's often from men
den kommer ofte fra mænd
who
af.
say, I've got this question, but I can't ask it.
Jeg har det her spørgsmål, men jeg kan bare ikke stille det.
I'm being cancelled.
Jeg bliver annulleret.
Because this movement's got a cancel culture.
Og den her bevægelse, den har en cancel culture.
They may not use that phrase, but that's what's going on.
De bruger måske ikke den frase, men det er det, der foregår.
So put your hands up if you feel like that. I've got this really awkward question, and if I asked it, people would look down upon me. So I then ask.
Så ræk hånden op, hvis du
So I
har,
have to bide my time.
hvis du har sådan et akavet spørgsmål, som folk vil kigge skævt på, hvis du stiller det.
So only one person put their hand up. I can't believe it's only one person. 2 people, 3. Oh, so we've got a few people in our group
Så vi har et par mennesker i vores
who
gruppe,
have questions which they know are antagonistic to what we profess to believe.
om nogle spørgsmål, som de ved er antagonistiske mod det, som vi kender og tror på.
But they rather would not ask the question.
Men de vil heller ikke stille
So I
spørgsmål.
would say to them,
For så vil jeg sige til dem,
are you serious?
er du seriøs?
After all this logic to 2021, you're still not on board.
Efter al den logik i 2021, der er du stadig ikke med
Or
ombord.
worse,
Eller værre,
we'll get out the bludgeon, which is like a big hammer. On May 2nd, 2022,
2. maj 2022,
I was going to say Ellen White, Elder Tess said that, and you're telling me you're against that.
eller til sagde det her, du siger, at du er imod det.
Because once you do that, what
Når
can
du
you
siger
say?
det, hvad kan du så sige?
You're cancelled.
Så bliver du annulleret.
So I think it's a really legitimate point.
Så jeg mener, at det er en helt legitim pointe.
And I'm really sad
Og jeg er
for a number of things.
ked af det, på grund af mange forskellige
One,
ting.
that so few of you were brave enough to put your hands up.
Et er, at der er så få af jer, der er modige nok til at række hånden op.
That even if it is just a few of you, that California has this culture amongst yourselves
At selvom måske det er i Kalifornien, men at det er, at der er sådan en
You're
kultur-
not uniquely bad because it's everywhere, by the
Ja,
way.
I er ikke unikt dårlige, fordi der er mange, der er på den her måde.
And whilst we have a leader who defines doctrine,
Og selvom vi har en leder, der definerer doktrin,
that we use that person's words to silence people.
at vi bruger den persons ord til at lukke for andre mennesker.
Because, sorry,
Sorry?
I've
Undskyld.
already forgotten what I said.
Jeg har allerede glemt, hvad jeg
Sorry, I'm
sagde.
having a conversation with my translator, a private one here. I have no idea what I said.
Jeg havde min oversætter her.
Your words against
Ah, okay.
opposite to.
So, I don't know Elder Test that well.
Så jeg kender ikke Tess så godt.
Maybe better than most people.
Måske
Of
bedre
course.
end de fleste mennesker.
But I know myself pretty well.
Men jeg kender mig selv ret godt.
And I do know that when you stand up before God's people,
Og jeg ved, at når man stiller sig op foran,
what you see is a one-dimensional figure.
så
Not
er
say
det, man ser,
two-dimensional.
det er en endimensionel figur.
And in another context, in another conversation, I could say something quite different.
Og i en anden kontekst, i en anden situation, så kunne jeg sige noget meget anderledes.
So I like to caution people to be careful about quoting prophets.
Så jeg kunne godt tænke mig, jeg kan godt, at folk de var forsigtige, når de citerede profeter.
If you're willing to call Elder Tess a prophet, and I am,
Hvis man er villig til at kalde eller tæt for en profet, og det er jeg.
because both we and they
For både vi og dem
have a history.
har en historie.
We only mentioned 2 prophets before, but I could mention a lot more that have baggage.
Vi nævnte kun 2 før, men jeg kunne nævne mange flere, som har bagage.
That are easily misunderstood.
Det bliver nemt misforstået.
The words are taken out of context,
Deres ord tages ud af konteksten.
and it becomes difficult if you put them on a pedestal and use them as the definitive marker for what's right and what's wrong.
Og de bliver placeret på en pedestal og brugt som markør for, hvad der er godt og hvad der er skidt.
Because it stops personal growth.
For det stopper personlig udvikling. Personlig vækst.
And I've touched on it very lightly, especially through this year.
Jeg har berørt det meget let, særligt gennem det her år.
But I think people have a misunderstanding on the role of certain individuals.
Men jeg tror, at folk de har en misforståelse af visse individers rolle.
And how they operate, how they manage their public persona, their public message.
Og hvordan de fungerer, hvordan de håndterer deres offentlige persona eller budskab.
If I were to tell you,
Hvis jeg skulle fortælle jer,
I know this leading person in the movement
jeg kender den her ledende figur i bevægelsen,
who says, if you eat meat
som siger, at hvis du spiser kød,
and you're a leader in the movement,
og du er en leder i bevægelsen,
you should be removed.
så burde du blive fjernet.
You might say, that's fair enough.
Så vil du måske sige, det vil være fair nok.
You might even say, of course.
Måske du endda siger, selvfølgelig.
But if I then told you
Men hvis jeg så fortalte dig,
that same person wrote a message to one of their relatives,
at den samme person skrev en besked til en af deres familiemedlemmer,
and said, when you come and visit next
og sagde,
week,
når du kommer og besøger mig næste uge,
don't forget to bring the salmon,
så glem ikke at tage laksen med,
because it's my favorite thing.
fordi det er min yndlingsting.
Now, I don't know how you would view that situation.
Jeg ved ikke, hvordan I vil se på den situation.
If you would see it as hypocrisy, apostasy, what?
Som frafald, eller
Because if you challenge the person, say,
som
you hypocrite,
hypokrati. Fordi hvis I
you turn him into a vegan and look what you do.
gjorde mig til en veganer, se hvad du gør.
And they said, you misunderstood me.
Og de siger, at du misforstod mig.
When I said you're not allowed to eat meat,
Det jeg sagde, at du ikke må spise kød,
I thought everybody knew what meat was,
så troede jeg, at alle forstod, hvad kød det var.
because fish is not meat.
Fordi fisk er ikke kød.
Meat, everybody knows, is a land animal.
Kød, det ved alle, det er et landgående dyr.
So there's no foul.
Så der er ikke nogen fejl.
Everything's good.
Alt er godt.
So I don't know what you would think about that dynamic.
Men jeg ved ikke, hvad I vil tænke om den dynamik.
Jackie,
Yeah, so I
Jack.
just thought, is that a double standard or is it a judgment? As what you're saying in your own mind.
so
Or it could be circumstantial.
so is this a double standard, hypocrisy?
Så er det en dobbelt standard eller dobbeltmoralskhed.
Are we wrongly judging the person?
Dømmer vi den korrekte?
Or the context, or do you have to understand the context?
Circumstantial.
The circumstantial, is there something circumstantial going on? All I know is
Måske.
that that's Alan White,
Men det er Ellen White.
and not everybody knows that.
Og det er ikke alle, der ved det.
So the point I wanted to make in that, I may have changed the names and it's like that, but it's a real situation. It was really Alan White.
Så det var i virkeligheden Ellen White.
And I don't know if that changes your view of salmon or not.
Jeg ved ikke, om det ændrer dit syn på laks eller ej.
I think it was actually mackerel in real life, but I changed the name.
Jeg tror,
Not to blame them, 'cause they don't want to accuse mackerels of anything wrong.
så er der makrel i den rigtige historie, men
So the point of me, does that change your view on Ellen White, prophets, what her writings say, veganism? I don't know if it changes how you view things.
så jeg ved ikke, om det ændrer dit syn på Ellen White, hendes skrifter, eller
Prophets are necessary
profeter er nødvendige.
just because God said that they are.
Bare fordi Gud sagde, at de er.
But I think we really need to be careful how we handle them.
Men vi skal være meget forsigtige med, hvordan vi håndterer dem.
Both the dead and the living ones.
Både de døde og de levende profeter.
Because if you don't, you end up getting this dynamic, this situation
Og hvis ikke du gør det, så ender du med at have den her situation, dynamik,
where we're not able to express our concerns, our doubts, our worries,
hvor vi ikke er i stand til at udtrykke vores tvivl, vores bekymringer.
we can't ask our questions.
Vi kan ikke stille vores spørgsmål.
Susan, sorry, you had your hand up a long time ago.
I lost that thought.
I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. Does anybody have any comment or thought or question?
Nogen, der har et kommentar eller et spørgsmål?
Victoria?
Based on what you said,
Okay, so I'll swing back in a minute. Emmanuel.
Et øjeblik.
Are you saying that, this is my just thought, that the prophet, their message is encoding, need to be decoded. So when you are talking to a prophet, you need to decode the message they're saying before you even like get into it and use it.
So Emmanuel has spoken about coding and encoding or decoding a message.
Okay, så Emmanuel taler om at kode og afkode et budskab.
And a term that we often use in this movement, because we don't normally talk about coding,
Og et begreb, som vi ofte ikke taler om, fordi vi ofte taler om,
is sifting.
er at
Sift your sources.
er at kunne skelne blandt sine kilder, at sigte sine kilder.
That's what they tell me to do. Sift your sources.
Det siger jeg skal gøre, sigte mine kilder.
And my response is, I would if I knew how to.
Det vil jeg gøre, hvis bare jeg vidste hvordan.
I have no idea how to sift sources.
Jeg ved ikke, hvordan jeg skal sigte mine kilder.
Victoria, did you remember your point?
Så jeg husker dine pointe.
Carry on.
I just know I just have different people that I express them to. So like I might speak to one member about my questions or concerns. I just want to put out that I understand that that there is kind of that culture a little bit, but it doesn't make me scared to voice what I have to say.
Okay, so Victoria says she has empathy about what we've just said about this idea of not being able to speak or question.
Så Victoria siger, at hun har empati for dem her, der ikke kan stille de her spørgsmål.
But she's able to express her concerns or questions privately, individually to people that she knows.
Men hun er i stand til at stille spørgsmålene privat til de folk, som hun kender.
Yeah, people in the movement, of course. Okay, so I need to stop. Yes, I was thinking the same. I thought I was at the 1 hour mark. I'm approaching the 2 hour mark. I'm sorry. Okay, so before we close, put your hands up if you're afraid. No, if you're, yeah, put your hands up if you're afraid to say the following.
Så før vi lukker, så ræk hånden op. Hvis
I
du-
don't agree with everything that Ellen White taught. Are you afraid to say that?
Jeg er ikke enig i alt, som Ellen White hun undervist. Er du bange for at sige det?
So that most people are comfortable to say, I don't agree with everything Ellen White said.
Så de fleste er komfortable med at sige det.
So this is, you're afraid to say that?
Så Lisa, er du bange for at sige
Doesn't
det?
stop me, but I'm afraid again.
Okay, I'm going to use afraid to stop in that.
So do I have fear that stops me from saying that Ellen White is wrong? Yeah, sometimes.
So you're afraid to say, Ellen White was wrong about the Sunday law. You're afraid to express that idea?
To certain people at certain times,
You're afraid of them or afraid of the truth?
the backlash.
Okay, but I'm not talking about afraid what people will do with it, but are you afraid to actually say what you think about Ellen White? It's about you and Ellen White. No. Anyone else? Okay, so no one's afraid. Put your hands up if you're afraid to disagree with Elder Tess
Ræk hånden op, hvis du
publicly.
er uenig med eller Tess offentligt.
Okay, so you could, if I could show you the camera here, all the hands shot up. So people here are afraid to disagree with Elder Tess, but they're not afraid to disagree with Ellen White.
Bange for at være uenig med eller Tess, men ikke med Ellen White.
And we'll close on that point,
Og jeg afslutter på den,
or I get into more trouble.
ellers kommer jeg i flere problemer.
Let's pray.
Lad os bede.
Holy God, we thank you for your mercy and your goodness.
Hellig Gud, vi takker dig for din nåde og din godhed.
As we grapple with our own humanity,
I takt med, at vi kæmper med vores egen menneskelighed.
as we wrestle with other people's humanity and how it affects us,
I takt med, at vi kæmper med andre menneskers menneskelighed og hvordan den påvirker os.
as we consider how fearful we are of what people think,
Når vi betragter, hvor bange vi er for, hvad andre folk tænker,
how we project those fears upon you, God,
projicerer vi så den frygt på dig, Gud.
I want to thank you
Jeg vil gerne takke dig
for myself and on behalf of others,
for mig selv, på min egen vegne og på de andres vegne,
that however much I misuse you,
at hvor meget jeg end måtte misbruge dig,
that I misunderstand you,
at jeg misforstår dig,
that perhaps sometimes people might not even like you.
at samtidig så kan det føre til, at folk måske
Your faithfulness towards each and every one of us is unfailing.
så er din trofasthed til hver enkelt af os Den fejler aldrig.
And unlike me,
Og ulig mig,
you never cease to do good.
så stopper du aldrig med at gøre godt.
In Jesus' name, amen.
I Jesu navn. Amen.